Well, hello everyone. Welcome to GradMissions Office Hours. I'm Lizanne, and
Hi guys, I'm Autumn. It's so nice to be with you again today.
as we have really enjoyed hosting this podcast, answering your questions about all the ins and outs of applications and the admission cycle for law and medical schools. So last week we talked about red flags and in a law school application primarily, but also some red flags in the med world too. And
Right.
then I figured today we might want to just chat about med season. It's med season. So AMCAS is opened, and we've been getting a lot of questions from students applying to medical school. Also have a lot of new clients applying to medical school, which is super exciting. And as we know, Autumn has quite the intense background in med school admissions and in the med school world. So I thought I might just kind of ask her some questions about what that looks like to apply to med school.
Yeah, I think that's been such an interesting thing because, anywhere that you move in academia, there are a bunch of acronyms. And so I had a client, we start working with people as early as just graduated from high school, trying to pick a pre-med, that kind of thing, where they're going to do their undergraduate experience. And I started just like firing off AMCAS and MCAT and all these things, and that poor student, their eyes were just bugging out. So maybe we start out with sort of just a quick digest of some of the more common acronyms. There are many more. We could be here for days talking about all the acronyms in med school admissions. But the main ones, right? The MCAT is it's the qualifying exam to be able to apply to med school, whether you want to apply DO, MD, MD, PhD, MD, MPA, whatever you're going to do, if it's going to involve med school, you have to take the MCAT, unfortunately. Sorry to be the bearer of such bad news, but that is it. The MCAT is a test that's very hard science, hard math based, and you definitely want to prepare for it. I love the idea of taking the MCAT during your junior year if possible, as close to when you took biochem as possible, and after 4 to 6 months of study. So that's really, if I had my wish list and a client, that's what I would hope for them.
Okay. And these students, when talking with their undergraduate advisor, I've heard a lot about, well, you can just wait and take biochem in your senior year, but is that something that we would advise?
Only if you're planning to take a gap year, which is completely understandable, right? The shadowing hours, the clinical experience that you're expected to have when you apply to med school sometimes does not lend itself to accomplishing while you're an undergrad, while you're taking all these hard science classes, you're wanting to be involved and show leadership and volunteer and have clinical hours and prep for the MCAT. It's a lot. And so a gap year is completely understandable and advisable in a lot of cases. So that would be the only case that I would say it's okay to wait and take biochem your senior year. If you're planning to take the MCAT the summer between junior and senior year, which a lot of friends do, you need to have biochem under your belt first. It is one of the biggest indicators of success on the MCAT and USMLE down the road.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because I remember we were talking with the client. She's like, "Oh well, I'm gonna wait and take it this time." We're like, "No, not if you're gonna take.
That's
It's
right.
really, really important for the MCAT." And I think that gets lost in translation sometimes.
That's right. Exactly. And, there are classes that are prerequisites that's, med schools require you to have these classes and to have earned a lot of times a C or better in those courses in order to apply to med school. And then there are classes that are recommended. And biochem can kind of float between those two, but if you're working with grad missions, it is not recommended, it is required for you to take biochem strategically before your MCAT. So that's one acronym, MCAT. AMCAS is another one. Double AMC is the sort of governing board for everything to do with med school, academic medicine. And so they are the folks who put on the MCAT. They also have some other qualifying exams like preview that some schools require. And so if you hear double AMC is the organization, AMCAS is the actual like application system, the credential assembly service where you put in all of your biographical information, essays, experiences, upload your LORs, all of those things. It's the system through which you apply. It is expensive and but it's just one of those necessary evils if you're applying to the MD world. If you're applying to the DO space, it's AACOMAS. People say it myriad ways. I say ACOMAS, but like some people call it, I've heard all kinds of things. So, but that is the DO caste system, and that is osteopathic medicine. And so we have allopathic medicine and we have osteopathic medicine. And a lot of people in this day and age apply to both. Um, Traditionally, the DO schools require lower credentials to be admitted. They have a little bit more holistic approach in their applications, and they also teach a little bit more of a holistic approach to medicine. So, I mean, that's very overarching and broad strokes, but that's sort of the general difference between the two.
Okay. So what about a student who is looking at med school for fall of 26? Is it too late to take the MCAT? Kind of when is that cut
Yeah.
off?
So it's not too late to take the MCAT, but it's going to be close.
Okay.
So if you are just now starting to think about the MCAT, you're going to really have to buckle down. September is the very latest date that you can take the MCAT and be considered for fall 26. So September 2025 is the last that you can take the MCAT to begin in fall of 2026. And it is really cutting it close. So ideally, you'll have had your MCAT score in place in a range that you are really comfortable and happy with by May, June, because apps open in May.
Okay. Okay. And typically, how long does it take between taking the MCAT and getting your results?
It's a few weeks. So it's a little quicker than the LSAT, and they do offer the MCAT a lot more times, right? You can take it more times per month.
Okay.
And you can take it again, but sort of like our advice on the LSAT, it's not a test you want to go into cold. If it's, and maybe you're still in the thick of taking hard science classes, but there are concepts on the MCAT that you may not have had since AP Bio your junior year of high school. And so you really, even if you are like the smartest science person in the universe, like taking a quick prep course, going through the basics, reviewing some of those pathways and formulas that you may not have seen since you were 17.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, don't take it cold because it's expensive. And don't take it as a practice test. Like, well, I'll just take it once to see how I do. Use a prep
Do a
course.
diagnostic online. Don't actually sign up and take it.
Right. Yeah, because it's a waste of time and money for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. Um, I'm just gonna keep asking more questions because I'm still learning so much. But
Yeah,
as
of
for
course.
um the MCAT, is it okay to retake it if you say you get it back and you're just disappointed? How do schools look at retake?
Yeah, absolutely. In the law school universe, most law schools take the highest LSAT score. So if you take it 3 times and your middle time was the highest, then that's the score they're going to take. That is not true of the MCAT at most schools. They will report on admission wise and scholarship wise on your most recent MCAT.
Okay.
So the vanity retake looks a little different in the med school space. If you've taken the MCAT and you're happy with your score and you don't have time to do something markedly different in your preparation, it's really not advisable to take it again because you may do worse.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. I thought you were going to say to take an average. I'm like, then really don't take it as a practice.
Oh, right. No. Law
That
school
used
used
to
to do
be, they
that.
used to do that. Yeah. And I'm like,
You talk to those like boomer lawyers and they're like,
oh,
take it again. We're like, "Yeah,
yeah.
different. This is why you need GradMissions because your mom and dad's advice is not so things change, right? It's always changing. And one thing I'm hearing a lot about right now, very plugged into the med school admissions world still, and people are applicants are really nervous about and schools are really looking for research experience, bench experience, especially if you have a plan to go into academic medicine in some capacity. If you're thinking MD, PhD, if you're thinking pathology, having research experience is so key. And some of my freshman clients right now are so anxious about, well, how do I start working with a lab? How do I get my foot in the door? And then we look on their campus jobs and there are lab techs, right? There are these jobs that it's like, but they feel sort of like it's beneath them. They're like, I'm not going to be rinsing beakers. But here's the thing. This is almost like a test run, right? To see if you're a good fit, like culturally and personality wise, the lab is it's powder keg, right? And things can go awry. You have a lot of personalities, you have a lot of ego involved in these labs. And so coming in a kind of a more of a minimal kind of role is such a good way for the folks who already work at the lab to see like, are you a good fit? And for you to see like, is this where I want to be? Is this research that I'm interested in learning more about? Not saying you have to do it for the rest of your life, but research is slow. And so when you get involved and you're rinsing beakers and then a position comes open and you can kind of move to a more senior kind of role, that's the way you do it. And we tease the boomers quite a bit, but they're right about the fact that some folks in this generation are not willing to start at the bottom, right?
Right.
And it's not demeaning, and it doesn't mean that you're not smart, and it's not what you're going to do for the rest of your life, but be humble. If you want
Exactly.
bench experience, you need to be willing to do what needs to be done. Go in, be on time, be respectful, own your mistakes, don't justify, don't point fingers, be humble, but then also speak up when you know something and use your voice, feel it out. It is as important as patient interaction and kind of sloughing off those rough edges of you as a researcher.
That's such solid advice. And I I was thinking about just I think that it can apply to future attorneys too. Um, you can tell when there's a law student who spent their high school years making copies at a firm or, right, because you're right that the work is not necessarily the most fulfilling, but you're learning so much just about the environment. So it sounds kind of the same way. You're learning about the environment. You learn how to interact with certain people in certain positions, and you learn how to read the room and things like that. And it really translates over to when you are doing your life's work because you know how to interact with different people in different situations. And you have learned that humility that sometimes the person with the not flashy degree or the not flashy position is the one that you go to when there's this problem or that sort of thing. So I think that's really solid advice that it may not be the work that you want to be doing, but you're still going to learn so much.
That's exactly it. I have a client right now in Canada. She's applying to med school, and she's been doing some research on aging. And I don't want to like give away anything that might be IP related, but so I'll just kind of keep it that. But their subjects that they've been working on in the lab are worms. Like, and these worms have a really defined body temperature that they have to stay at in order for them to stay alive, right? And if they're testing these different factors when it comes to longevity, and so the custodian who comes in and cleans accidentally unplugged one of the worms like ecosystems that they have them in like an incubator kind of thing, and they
Mhm.
lost like 6 months of work, right? And there was a language barrier, and this client speaks the language that the custodian speaks, and so they were able to kind of figure out what happened because at first the PI was blaming the students, right? They're like, you messed up, like the worms are all dead, what did you do? And so through her humility, right? And her skills with the second language, which is so beneficial. But all of this to say, it was because of the relationship she had built with this custodian that they were able to get to the bottom of it. And they actually were able to glean some really useful research about what exactly they were able to time lapse, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but it's exactly what you said, Lysanne. Yes, you need to treat the person who's leading that lab with respect, but you need
Mhm.
to treat everybody in that lab with respect. This transcends all over the place, right? This happens
Yes.
in your patient experience too. I can't tell you how many times in an interview, we called it a postmortem, right? Postmortem of a med school interview, when one of the doctors who interviewed would say something like, "This kid told a story about how they were the hero and they were smarter than the doctor they were shadowing." And he was like, automatic deny. Like, no, like the interview scores for the student were abysmal because they thought they were showing how smart they were, but this physician read it in a completely different way when they talked about it in the interview.
Well, if you know everything, why would you want to be taught new things? Kind of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's dangerous, right? Because you
Sure.
don't know everything. That's why you're going to med school. And
Right.
there's a difference between, and you and I see the opposite too, right? We see these people who are brilliant, who really downplay their roles in these research projects or clinical experiences. So there's a balance. You're like, Autumn, you're telling me not to be the hero, and you're also telling me to be the hero. What I want you to be is, I want you to be truthful, and I want you to be authentic, and I want you to own your role and talk about the things you learned more than the ways you were awesome.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because we can see that you're awesome. There's no, you don't have to keep telling it. We can see that.
Show us,
Let
don't
it
tell us.
exactly. Let your accolades speak for themselves.
That's right. Some of the work right now that med students are doing is thinking really strategically through their target schools, identifying kind of like our conversation we had around law school, like what is a target, what is a reach, and what is a safety med school, and a couple of things around that. Just because it's a safety med school for you doesn't mean that you're a shoe-in. Right. Um, you can look at your credentials. Your Lysium score on Student Doctor Net is a great way to kind of plug in your stats and just see, at least formulaically, whether or not you're likely to get an interview. A lot of people who are a shoe-in as far as Lysium goes, and if you don't know what that is, we'll link it in show notes. If you work with GradMissions, it is a part um, of your strategic cycle tracker doc that we built for you. But just because you have the stats to get an interview doesn't mean that you're ready to interview there. A lot of people who have really high MCAT scores and GPAs, frankly, I love you, but you're awkward and you don't know how to talk about yourself in a way that is palatable.
Right.
And that's not to say that I've heard parents, I've spoken to groups of parents and prospective med students who say, well, that's really punitive to people who are neurodivergent. Heard. Like, I get that. I understand that. But them's the breaks, right? Like, that's the way it is. And there are a lot of accommodations. Lisanne and I are champions of
Absolutely.
accommodations, but you also have to do your work and you have to put in that work. And so just because you're super smart and you think, well, this is my safety school, I'm going to go into this interview and they should be so lucky, you're probably not going to get admitted. Like your interview score is going to be terrible. And so you have to work through it and you have to learn to talk to yourself about yourself in a way that is palatable. They are testing for bedside manner, right?
Right.
They are testing for you being a part of the ecosystem they're building with their MS1 class. And it's a delicate balance. And so that is some of our work that we do here at God Missions is mock interviews, and we spend a lot of time there. And it's not always fun, but the end result is just a dramatic difference in the way you talk about yourself.
For sure. And I think, like you said, it's not fun, but a lot of times we'll record them so that students can go back and say, "Well, I don't feel like I had this certain tone or what," and then it's like, "Oh, actually, I did," so that you're able to work on those things because we all have those blind spots.
First. And
So,
you're nervous, and your body language gets like a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then
with my hands, yeah, 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 for sure.
exactly it. And at the end of the day, your final rank score that's establishing whether or not you get invited to join that MS1 class can be between 60 and 80% based on how you interview.
Wow.
And you can, scream at the top of your lungs from the rooftops about how unfair that is, but that's just where we are. So if you want to not have that element of things, get a PhD. Like maybe med school's not for you. We had some harsh truths last week on our podcast about if you're
Yeah.
not willing to do the work, then maybe law school's not for you. And here's the thing, we have all been in a situation where we're having a health issue and we go to a doctor who does not listen, who
Mm.
does not seem to understand what we're saying, and who frankly just doesn't care, right? We've all been in that situation. Hopefully we got out of it. And that is what med schools are trying to ascertain during this experience, right? Like it's not like you're going to get friendlier and more open and jovial when you go through 4 years of really tricky med school. And we want to make sure that we're providing healthcare providers who are safe for patients.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Lisanne, hopefully you like understand everything about med school now.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, can this be part one? Because I have more questions.
Yes, yes, I know. We didn't even get into like the depth of
Right.
all the things. So we'll do a part two. And
Yes.
we may even do some red flag, green flag around med school admissions. And for those of you who are thinking about residency, we may layer in a residency expert too to talk about how this applies to ARIS and that application process.
Definitely. And I also would love to kind of do a high level of, I think what you do with the roadmap for our pre-med students is beautiful and so beneficial, and it helps so many students with those questions of when do I take this class? And
Yes.
I, they want a formula. And
Yes.
so maybe we could have a podcast just with a high level of, this is how you can pace yourself,
Yeah,
and things like that. So
I think that'd be great.
okay. Well, it's time to turn the lights off on Grad Missions podcast,
All right.
the office, but the lights are always on our socials. So follow
Bye.
us. We're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, we have a YouTube channel where you can watch these. So just let us know in any of those places where if you have questions that we can talk about during a podcast. We love, obviously, to talk about these topics and to help you as you think about your journey to law or med school. Thanks, guys.
Okay, bye y'all.